So my name is Wale. I'm the technical lead for the Android Window Manager and Activity Manager. Today, I'm going to be presenting what we're doing in N to support multi-windowing mode. It's going to be a relatively short presentation, mainly because I want to give you all a chance at the end to ask any questions you may have relating to your app-specific use case in multi-windowing mode. OK. So multi-windowing mode allows multiple activities to be visible on screen at the same time. The activities are resizable from the full screen area down to a minimum size as allowed by the system or activity. In the end, we're going to be supporting 3 forms of multi-windowing mode. Split screen multi-windowing mode, where 2 activities are visible side by side, and the divider in the middle can be used to give more or less screen space to one activity or the other. Picture-in-picture multi-windowing mode, where an activity is zeroed always on top of all other activities on screen. And free-form multi-windowing mode, where multiple activities are visible on screen at the same time. They can be moved around freely and also resized to any arbitrary dimension. So some important things in the end to keep in mind, right? The Android activity lifecycle model is not going to be changing in multi-windowing mode. We're still only going to have one resumed activity in the system at a time. And all other visible activities are going to be in the paused visible state. There are several reasons we are keeping this model on Android, right? And one of the main reasons is, being in the resume state is an important indicator to the system on what kind of resources an activity can acquire, because it kind of has the highest, important score. For example, right, the camera service is kind of a singleton resource, right? And the resumed activity is always guaranteed to get that resource compared to all other activities that are in the pause state. Another important thing to note is that we are now also factoring in the low memory score adjustment of visible activities in the pause state using as the order. For those of you that don't know, the low memory score adjustment on Android is basically an important score given to all processes in the system. The higher your score, the more important you are to the system, and the more the system will try to keep you alive. And when the system is running low on resources, right, it kills things that are of lower importance score first. Right? So for example, you can have a service running in the background, right, and you can have the resumed activity. And the system, when it's running low on resources, would kill the service running in the background first before the resumed activity that the user might be interacting with. So similar for visible activities that are in the pause state, right, we kind of rank them in order of their Z order, right, and give them an appropriate low memory score adjustment. So if the system is really, really running low on memory and it needs to kill visible activities, it's going to start from the one with the lowest Z order first. However, when the system does that, right, we do preserve the current window on screen, so it's still visible to the user, right, and we apply a dim layer on top of it. Once the user interacts with the app again, right, we then bring it back to life. Something else that is important to note is that as of N, since it isn't desirable for video apps to stop video playback when they're in the pause state, the new recommendation as of N is for video apps to handle play pause actions on start, on stop, versus on resume, on pause. While it has always been the case in Android that a pause activity can still be visible, it has not been as visible to the user as it will be with multi-window, right? So it's a message we're now pushing forward a little bit strongly now that on what the various life cycle states represent, right? When you're on start, it means you're going to be visible soon. On resume means you're visible and focused. On pause means you're still visible but not focused. And on stop means you're no longer visible. So another thing to note is that as the user resizes your app in multi-window mode, we do issue configuration changes. However, we only limit these configuration changes to configurations that will cause new resources to be loaded in your app. So for example, if your app has 2 buckets, where it has a layout representation for portrait and one for landscape, right? And as the user resizes your app, right, in portrait mode, if they're not crossing a threshold that will cause it to switch orientation, right, we do not issue new configuration changes or cause you have to relaunch, right? However, once they cross that configuration threshold, right, and new resources need to be loaded, we do reissue the configuration change for landscape mode. It's also important to note that the configuration change I'm referring to here only applies to the activity on screen and not the overall device configuration. So the device can be in landscape mode while your activity in multi-window mode can be in portrait mode. Also, as you do today, you can continue to undo configuration changes to avoid relaunches. In order to avoid relaunches in multi-window mode, you need to undo all the configurations I have on screen. Screen size, smaller screen size, screen layout, and orientation. If you choose not to undo the configuration changes, you will be relaunched during resizing. However, we do preserve your current window on screen until you render new content into a new window, and we replace it seamlessly so that the experience to the user is not jarring and appears as smooth as possible. So there are several new APIs we're going to be introducing in End to better support multi-window mode. I'm going to be going over a few of these APIs. So the big one is the resizable activity manifest attribute. This is an attribute that you set to indicate to the system that your activity supports multi-window and can be resized to any arbitrary dimension. It's important to note that we enable this activity by default for all apps, including the ones not targeting N, right? And you need to explicitly target N and set it to false in order to disable. Not that we recommend that, though, for all apps. Another important thing to note is that the root activity of a task determines the resizability of that task. You can think of a task as every single card entry you see in the recent activity or overview activity, right? So if the root activity is marked as resizable, any additional activity that goes in that task is also resizable. However, if the root activity isn't resizable, then no other activity in that task, the task will not be resized, right? So no other activity in that task will be resized as well. Another cool new API we're adding is the launch adjacent API. With the launch adjacent flag, you can launch an activity adjacent to yourself while in split screen multi-window mode. For example, I have on screen the Chrome activity on one side with an address link. An implementation could be done where once you click on that address link, the map activity is launched adjacent to the Chrome activity. So an activity can also use the layout stylable, mostly in freeform multi-window mode, to set its initial or default launching position and size on screen. You can set things like your default height, width, gravity, whether you want to be on top, center, bottom, right? And what the minimum dimensions you allow the user to resize your application to. So in multi-window mode, right, as the user resizes your activity, right, the layout of your app can be slow depending on your implementation, right? So what the user would notice is kind of an effect where they perform an action and they're all the way here, right? And your app is still kind of taking time to relay out to catch up to the user action. That experience is not too desirable, right? So what we're actually doing in N is we introduce a second UI thread in the application process to draw a background color that keeps in line with the user action as the main app's UI thread takes time to render content to catch up to the user action. You can use the window background stylable to customize what this color is. So picture-in-picture mode. While it's desirable for most apps to support multi-window mode, it doesn't make sense for all apps to support picture-in-picture mode or multi-window. For example, you would expect an app like Netflix or YouTube to support picture-in-picture mode, right? But you wouldn't expect an app like Google Docs to support picture-in-picture mode. So to differentiate this form of multi-window mode, we have the supports picture-in-picture mode manifest attribute for the app to indicate that it can go into this mode. With apps that have this flag set, right, on devices that support picture-in-picture mode, they can call the enter picture-in-picture mode API to put themselves into picture-in-picture mode. A few things to keep in mind with picture-in-picture mode is, even though the activity is Z-ordered on top of all other activities in the system, right, it is actually in the paused visible state, right? And the activity that is full screen below the picture-in-picture activity is actually in the resume state. And the main reason for doing this is once the user puts your activity into picture-in-picture mode, right, they really want to watch your activity to the side, right, while interacting with the full screen activity. So it makes sense for that activity to be focused and resumed while your activity is in the visible pause state. It's also important to keep in mind that you can continue to use the media session APIs we have today, right, while you're in picture-in-picture mode to keep track of, media buttons like play, pause, actions, and whatnot. We also offer APIs that allow you to get notified whenever the system or the user puts you into multi-window mode or whenever you exit multi-window mode and picture-in-picture mode. And you can also query the system on your current windowing mode. In freeform mode, activities are allowed to display content next to the caption/title area using the overlay with the core caption API. You can kind of think about the Chrome tabs you have on your computer, right, where the Chrome tabs are next to the window control buttons. With this API, you can kind of do something similar. Also in freeform mode, an activity can launch another activity at a specific location and size on screen using the activity options set launch bounce API. So currently on Android, we support several APIs, right, that affect the entire screen configuration. Right? You can think of the nav bar, status bar customization, for example, right? And this customization for the entire screen would have conflict in multi-window mode, especially when apps request conflicting configuration. So to that effect, right, we have most of these configurations disabled when the apps are in multi-windowing mode. I have some of the examples listed on screen, like the system UI customization for status bar nav bar, right? Show wallpaper behind, immersive mode, and setting orientation. Something important to know with setting orientation, right? Once you say your app is compatible with multi-window mode, right, having a fixed orientation doesn't really make sense in that world anymore, since the user can kind of resize your app to any dimension, and it can change orientation while changing that dimension. So it kind of makes sense for that to be disabled, regardless of the conflict it might have. So some UX best practices and guidelines for multi-window mode include, you want to provide a single responsive UI for your application so that the user has a consistent experience while using your application on the same device at different sizes. You want to start by designing your app for the most challenging use case so you can uncover architectural problems earlier in the design process. You want to follow the material design pattern so that your app has a consistent look and feel with other apps running on the system, right? And you want to only disable multi-window mode when justified. It would be odd if most apps on a user device go into multi-window mode, right, and your app is the odd one out, and the user launches it, right, and it launches into full screen mode. And look for various places to take advantage of all the APIs we're exposing for multi-window mode, like the launcher I just sent, right, for appropriate use cases. So some more guidelines and best practices. We recommend that apps with similar layout for phones and tablets may use the phone tablet the phone UI on tablets, right? Since the experience will not be too jarring to the user as they transition from one size to another. However, for apps with completely different layouts, right, we recommend that the phone UI shouldn't be used, right? Instead, the tablet UI should be made to work at a smaller size, right, and scaling up from there. The main reason for these recommendations and guidelines is to kind of give the user a consistent feel and experience as they resize your activity in the same device. So to simplify adapting your app for multi-window mode, what we've found is it's better to design your app for the smaller size first. Right? If you can get something working with 220 dp wide or tall, right, you can, by condensing elements or removing non-insertion ones, then you can basically scale up your app's use case from there, adding things as needed. A nice complementary feature to multi-window mode is the system-wide drag-and-drop API. With the Android drag-and-drop framework, you can allow activities to share data using the graphical drag-and-drop gesture. Some of the basic API for drag-and-drop include start drag-and-drop, update drag shadow. The drag shadow is really the thumbnail you see when you're actually dragging, and cancel drag-and-drop. Pretty cool API. OK, so as I said, it's going to be a short presentation. And I would just like to end by saying the Android framework, right, we've done a whole lot of work in it to add multi-window mode and to make sure the APIs we feel will be useful to app developers and the UI are supported at the platform level, right? However, that's just half the work, right? We really depend on the app developers, right, to start picking up this feature up in the end preview, to start using it, testing out your app, making sure it performs and lays out correctly, right, and resize it, see what kind of problems you come up with, and providing us feedback on things we can improve in the platform to make your life easier, right? It's kind of a two-sided effort to get this feature to a level where it really brings joy to all Android users everywhere as they use multi-window mode. So yeah. So that's all I have for the presentation. I have some useful links up on screen, right? And there are mics on all the hallways if you want to ask any questions on the topic. Thank you.